Test 1, Part 2, Passage 2. Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
So, in our last class, we spoke about public relations. Just to quickly review, we said that public relations involves activities that create a positive opinion among consumers about a company or a product. And why is it so important for a company to maintain a good relationship with the public? Anyone?
If the company doesn't have good relations with consumers, it will be much harder for it to sell its products.
Yes, that's definitely true. Without good PR, a company might lose significant market share. Now, all companies run into problems now and then, and, of course, the public relations team should try to minimize any damage to the company's reputation caused by these problems. But sometimes a situation may require more than just public relations work. You see, if a company doesn't act quickly to manage a minor problem, well, it can quickly turn into a real crisis. Let me give you an example. A food manufacturer makes potato chips. Then, in two separate incidents, people find insect parts in packages of chips. The media picks up on it. The company doesn't respond until the second complaint, and then a company spokesperson accuses the consumers of lying. But soon, insect parts are discovered in more of the company's chips, so now no one believes the company. Next thing you know, angry consumers are organizing a boycott. Here's my question. When did the problem become a crisis?
When the spokesperson accused the consumers of lying?
Right. And was there some other way the company could have handled the problem?
It should have tried to make things right, instead of pretending that the problem didn't exist.
Absolutely. So you see, it started out as a relatively small problem, insects in a couple of packages of potato chips. But the way the company dealt with the issue turned it into a real crisis. When it became clear that the company was in denial about the situation, people stopped buying the company's products. So that leads me to today's topic. What can a business do to prevent full-blown crises and maintain consumer faith in its products? The answer is crisis management, which is a systematic approach that involves the whole company, not just public relations team.
Oh, I think I know what you mean. The company could have had its quality control people look into the issue.
Good. And keep in mind that crisis management doesn't just minimize fallout from a difficult situation. This is because when crisis management is applied in the right way, it can actually improve the company's reputation and make the company stronger.
Is that possible? I mean, for crisis management to actually strengthen the company?
Well, why don't we look at the insects in the potato chips problem, and you tell me how the company could have used crisis management to turn the problem around. As I mentioned earlier, the company was slow to respond. It even falsely accused its customers of lying, and that's when things started to get really bad. Customers started to boycott the company's products. Now, let's look at an alternative approach, one where crisis management is applied. What would you do if you knew you had messed up and you knew it was your fault?
Admit my mistake and apologize.
That's right. That's the first step, and you do it quickly before the problem gets out of hand. Take the example I mentioned earlier. The CEO or a very visible company spokesperson should issue a profuse apology, and to show that the company regrets what happened, it should issue a product recall. Gather all the packaged chips and destroy them. What does this put in the consumer's mind?
That the company's thinking about public safety, not profits.
Exactly. That's why you issue a recall. You show that you're willing to forego profits because the consumer is more important. Now, what's next? Remember, crisis management is a systemic approach. The whole company's involved.
Aren't the apology and recall sufficient?
Well, that is what some companies seem to think. But remember, you want to prevent this thing from happening again. Alice mentioned it a while back, quality control. The company has the quality control team investigate how those insects got into the potato chips in the first place, and then redesign the manufacturing process to ensure that in the future, chips aren't contaminated by insects. The administration revises its policy about plant sanitation, and to make sure the public knows what the company is doing, the public relations people let consumers know about the new policy and quality control procedures in a press release. This assures consumers that you're actually doing something about the problem. But that's not all. The company can take it one step further. Put yourself in the company's position. How would you get customers to start buying your products again?
How about some sort of special discount on its products? Maybe even give stuff away for free. Something to create goodwill among customers.
There you go. Special promotions are a great way to show that the company's in touch with its customers and is willing to take that additional step to please them. Promotions can be done in all kinds of ways. Going back to our potato chip example, the company could give away free chips to loyal customers. Or maybe buy one, get one free. That sort of thing. So, when you put all these things together, the apology, the recall, the quality control checks and policy changes, and the special promotions, well, this is crisis management in its totality. Would these steps help the company in the end? I'm willing to bet that within a year of initiating crisis management, the company's profits would increase to at least the level they were at before the problem occurred. And more importantly, the company's reputation would be even stronger because the public would know how much it cares about them.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 6. What is the lecture mainly about? Seven. According to the professor, in what way is crisis management a systemic approach? Eight. According to the professor, what might the potato chip company do to keep its future products free of insects? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Now, what's next? Remember, crisis management is a systemic approach. The whole company's involved.
Aren't the apology and recall sufficient?
Well, that is what some companies seem to think. But remember, you want to prevent this thing from happening again.
9. What does the professor mean when she says this?
Well, that is what some companies seem to think.
Ten. Why does the professor mention free potato chips? 11. In the lecture, the professor describes the steps in crisis management. Indicate whether each of the following is a step in the process.
Test 1, Part 2, Passage 3. Listen to part of a discussion in an art history class.
I'll be talking about stained glass today. Well, I guess everyone knows what stained glass is.
Like the colorful windows in cathedrals? I love that stuff.
You've got it. And the term stained glass can refer to the material itself or what's created with it, like the windows you mentioned. Okay. The techniques for making stained glass and the uses of it have changed over time, and it is these changes that I'd like to focus on. It's believed that as early as the 3rd millennium BC, Egyptian and Mesopotamian potters discovered glass when they baked clay on blocks made of natron.
Wait, Professor, can you please explain that again? What were the blocks made of?
Natron, it's a hydrated sodium carbonate mineral that's found in saline lake beds. Well, when this stuff is mixed with sand and the mixture is burned, it melts and hardens into glass. In this way, the craftsmen back then learned to fabricate objects of transparent glass. And by the 1st century AD, the Romans had devised the technique of blowing glass. Yes, Jenna, do you have another question?
Yeah, was all the glass clear back then, or were they able to make stained glass as well?
Well, the glass was transparent at first, but during medieval times, the 12th and 13th centuries, craftsmen added color to it. And they achieved this in 2 ways. One was to add certain minerals to the glass. For example, they added copper or cobalt to make green or blue glass, and gold or iron oxides to produce reds and oranges. They would fuse the color into the glass with fire, and the temperature had to be at least 1,150 degrees Fahrenheit. This was the most common way. What I'd like to point out, though, is that the early glass was fired in a crude way, so the glass contained many imperfections and bubbles. What this did, was, it made the glass shimmer. It was very attractive.
When you say shimmer, do you mean because of the color or the texture?
The texture, the imperfections I mentioned. The color didn't really have that shimmering effect. Now, the other method of coloring glass involved fusing a thin layer of paint onto the glass with fire. It was known as flashed glass. The difference between using minerals and fire coating the paint onto the glass is that the flashed glass was less opaque. It was easier to see through. Anyway, the artist would draw the figure or pattern for the stained glass piece. Then he or she would lay out these bits of glass that had already been colored and cut to the right size. The pieces were then joined with lead strips because lead was flexible. For the most part, these 2 coloring techniques were standard. What did change during medieval times, however, were the designs and patterns that artists used. Anybody know where most of this glass was used?
I think it was mostly churches. The most prominent ones are in large cathedrals. I don't think I've seen much of it anywhere else.
Yup, that's right. Basically, churches were the biggest users of stained glass, and often it was used to depict religious figures or imagery. Some ancient fragments that survived from perhaps between the 9th and 11th centuries included images of the head of Christ. During the Romanesque period, massive cathedrals had stained glass windows that represented figures from the Old Testament. It was only during the Renaissance that designs became more secular in nature. However, in the 16th century, artists began utilizing a technique known as enamel painting. Instead of cutting the colored glass into pieces and fitting them together, they started painting a single pane of glass with different colors. Their intention was to imitate the frescoes and paintings of that era. Actually, The result wasn't as aesthetically appealing. If anything, it was rather ordinary and didn't have that shimmer I mentioned earlier. But you know what they did when they started using this new technique? They smashed much of the early stained glass. They considered it old-fashioned. And then they replaced the stained glass windows with the painted glass. Not many pieces survived, and that was a great loss of very valuable cultural assets.
I'll say, seems like there's more of an effort to preserve ancient buildings, traditions, and artifacts these days.
I totally agree, but all was not lost. Stained glass made a comeback in the 20th century. It was when Louis Comfort Tiffany produced a new style that made stained glass a popular art form. What Tiffany tried to do was produce a variety of visual effects without painting the glass. He took thin layers of colored glass and layered them to create a sense of depth and texture. He also popularized opalescent glass. Opalescent glass has a milky appearance and contains iridescent colors. Although Tiffany did not invent the method of producing it, a man named John Lafarge is credited with that, he mastered the production of it. And not only did he make pieces for churches, but he also made everyday objects, such as lampshades and vases, that could be used to decorate homes.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 12. What is the main topic of the talk? (13) What does the professor say about early stained glass? (14) How does flashed glass differ from mineral-colored glass? (15) What can be inferred about the medieval works of stained glass? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
I'll say, seems like there's more of an effort to preserve ancient buildings, traditions, and artifacts these days.
I totally agree, but all was not lost. Stained glass made a comeback in the 20th century.
16. Why does the professor say this?
But all was not lost.
17. Why does the professor mention John Lafarge?